Superman is fighting Godzilla, and it is dope. Check this out. So basically, this opens up with like Superman flying to meet Godzilla. And the question's got to be asked, why are they even fighting in the first place? To sum this up in like 10 seconds, because you guys don't really care all that much, basically the Legion of Doom, like the anti-Justice League in DC Comics, was doing some shenanigans and accidentally brought Godzilla and Kong and a whole bunch of kaiju into the main DC universe. Like it matters. Godzilla could just materialize out of thin air and we would be fine. Anyway, Godzilla just arrives in Metropolis. Now, the cool thing about this, right? Like, once Superman sees him, he's like, okay, I don't know if you can understand me or even be reasoned with at all, but your presence is a danger to the people of Metropolis, and we can't have that. So let's take whatever this is somewhere else. And Godzilla just kind of looks at him, right? And rightfully so, because it's like Godzilla. It's not like he doesn't understand. It's more just like, are you worth my time, guy in red pajamas, underwear, right? Like, should I waste my time with you? But then like, as Superman continues to talk, Godzilla starts to fire up that atomic breath. Right now, he doesn't even get the breath off. He doesn't even get like the atomic blast off, right? Superman's like, I know what's coming. Pow, right? Just like cold cocks this guy, just boom. But it's not enough to knock him out, right? Because like, it's literally like, okay, the fight is on, right? Like the battle's on, right? Superman comes swooping back into the offense, boom, gets smacked by Godzilla's tail, gets sent flying through a building, only for the Flash to show up and just be like, hey man, so like, do you need any help? Now, because the Flash can just like run really fast, and if you were to just like throw some ice on the ground, he would basically be donezo. There's only so much he can do, which is kind of like help people evacuate the area. And so what this is it leads to like the rest of the Justice League responding. You get Wonder Woman, you get Supergirl, which is really dope, Hal Jordan, the Green Lantern, and then you get like Hawkgirl, who's kind of cool sometimes, I guess, and then you get like Green Arrow, Oliver Queen. I don't even know what he's gonna do. It's like when Hawkeye was in the Avengers movie. Like, I mean, cool, I guess it's awesome that you're here, but like at the end of the day, what are you gonna do aside from like trying to shoot Loki and then basically failing spectacularly? But like everybody else shows up, right? Like the rest of the league shows up. But that's when you start to realize the scale of what's going on. Now, some of these things I recognize and some of them I don't, right? You got like a giant spider that's over there in Central City. You got a woolly mammoth that's in Themyscira. Of course, you got Godzilla in Metropolis. Hell's bells, they even got a giant bat in Gotham City, right? I mean, just so on the nose, DC, right? I mean, you can tell they're having a blast writing this. And so at this point, like, you basically have like the Bat family that responds, right? Like Batman, Robin, Jason Todd, Nightwing, you get Batgirl, Barbara Gordon, who's kind of cool. And even like Cyborg says he's gonna show up, which I guess, Rahoo, right? Like the Justice League's very own walking, talking iPhone is going to save the day, I guess. And then like Black Canary shows up. Now, I would make fun of Black Canary here, but she actually has a dope moment in this story. It's ridiculously cool, right? So at that point, what you end up getting here is Superman, who basically goes back on the offense with like Godzilla. And then you have like Hawkgirl who shows up and like tries to pummel this guy as best she can. But one of the funny things about this is they learn incredibly fast. Godzilla is extremely fast, right? Much faster than he appears to be. And of course, given his size and his just durability, he's incredibly strong as well. Now, before we get to the Superman segment, we actually end up jumping over to like Gotham City with the giant bat, because this section is pretty awesome, right? You of course have Kate, Batwoman, who's here. Do not let her fool you, man. Batwoman is amazing. I love Batwoman in DC Comics right now. She's never been cooler than she is right now in DC Comics. It's pretty solid. But for the most part, they don't really know exactly how to handle this kind of situation. And it makes perfect sense. It's one of the reasons why I love this. If it came to like Two-Face, right, Solomon Grundy, any of those guys, that like the Bat family would more or less know how to handle that, because like they face them over and over again. A gigantic bat that quite literally looks like it flew out of hell is not something that they face off against regularly. Not only that, it's got a sonic scream. So like it's enough to actually take out the bat wings that they have. Now, while all this is going on, of course, collateral damage, right? Like debris falling on people and all that kind of stuff. And because I cannot be a superhero in the sense that I'd be like, hey, look, man, I mean, it sucks to be you guys, debris falling on you. I don't know what to tell you, right? We got like more important things to focus on than that. The Bat family decides to be superheroes and they more or less go around trying to rescue people where they can, when they can. Anybody who's been a part of this channel long enough will tell you I would be a villain. If I got powers, I would absolutely be a bad guy. But you get this amazing moment with Jason Todd. Now, Jason Todd, for those of you guys who are unfamiliar with his character, he is very much this just kind of vigilante, I don't mind killing people type of guy, right? Kind of the antithesis to Batman, right? Where Batman's like, sure, we could kill the Joker and spare untold lives that the Joker will probably end at some point in the future, but I cherish my no killing rule. I don't care how many men, women, and children have to die in order for me to keep it. And so what ends up happening is like they tell Jason Todd, do not pull the trigger, because he's there with probably the biggest and most amazing gun that I've ever seen. And he's got like this just giant thing in his sights. And he's like, all I have to do is pull the trigger, man, and it's donezo. But to their credit, the concern of the Bat family is, if you shoot this thing, one, we don't know if you'll kill it. And two, if you do, we don't know where it's gonna land. What happens if it lands on like a skyscraper and kills thousands of people, right? Like, is that really worth the risk? But in the mind of Jason Todd, it's, if we don't kill it, thousands of people are gonna die anyway, right? So, I mean, hey, you know, like, 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other, right? Might as well just take this thing out. And so what he ends up doing, it's firing off the shot against the objections of everybody. Batman, Nightwing, the whole 9 yards. He fires it off. It doesn't kill him. His whole area gets blasted. He survives. But then they just kind of start screaming at him for what it was that he did. But while this is going on, right, Cyborg arrives just in time, right? Like the iPhone arrives just in time. I'm gonna start calling him iPhone from right now. And he shows up and basically puts together what is in effect a sonic amplifier for Black Canary, because what they're gonna do is they're gonna just like jerry-rig this thing to a Batwing and fly up and use it. And it's amazing, because like when they do, they kind of get the attention of like this giant bat, and that's when they make their move, right? They literally go flying up to this thing. Black Canary screams into the sonic amplifier, like in this thing's face, right? And just completely and totally overwhelms it and seemingly either knocks it unconscious or kills it. We're not really given a definitive answer here, but that's when you jump back over to Superman and Godzilla alongside Hawkgirl. And the fight between these guys, man, it is knockdown, drag out, because Superman's realized quick, fast, and in a hurry. One, Godzilla is incredibly powerful, and two, it'll kill him if it gets the chance, which I was never the biggest fan of Godzilla until I met Mariah, and she was like, sometimes Godzilla's a good guy, sometimes he's a bad guy. Sometimes the plot of any one particular Godzilla movie is that he shows up and just kind of like smacks humanity around a little bit just to remind them who's in charge, and then just goes back into the ocean again. And like, that's it. That's the plot of the movie. And that's kind of what's happening here, right? Like Godzilla's showing up and just kind of being like, just so you guys know, right? And then just kind of smacking Superman and these guys around, right? Just kind of establishing his dominance, which is pretty awesome if we're being honest with ourselves. But again, they do what they can where they can. But Hawkgirl is smacked away by Godzilla's hand, only to be rescued by Shazam. Yes, son, Billy Batson has arrived on the scene. And it's cool because it's like having two Supermen that are basically facing off against Godzilla right now. And that's what's so awesome, is because while this is happening, Godzilla starts to charge up, people. Godzilla starts to charge up. You guys know how it is. You guys know how it is. That where you guys know how it is. It's revving up and then it's just like, BAM! And then just like the atomic breath just gets blasted. At the same time, Superman fires off its heat vision. It's a standoff, son. It is a standoff between Godzilla and Superman firing off their energy towards one another. Even Shazam is looking at this like, dude, this is amazing, right? Like, this is the coolest thing. But what he does, like Shazam, comes up with an idea, right? He ends up flying over to Godzilla, lands on his head, and then just shouts, Shazam! And then like the lightning comes down, it hits Shazam, but then it also hits Godzilla at the same time. It was kind of foolish, right? It was a relatively foolish thing because he could have gotten himself killed. And in fact, even when he's reverted back to like Billy Batson, right? Like the little kid, he's just like, that was awesome. Because I mean, let's be honest with ourselves, guys. Like, we would have reacted the same way. I would have been like, yeah, superpowers. But like, it was cool. Like, it's a really, really cool thing. But even Superman kind of yells at him, right? He was like, it was too risky. Don't do that again. But the problem is, in this moment when they're flying away, Godzilla's like, son, all right, look, it was cool and it was fun before, and you're adorable, Superman. You're so cute with your cape and your magic underwear. You're so adorable. But like, I'm done playing games, right? When you mess with the bull, you get the horns. So what does he do? Fires off that atomic breath, bam! Superman gets the brunt of it, goes crashing down to the streets of Metropolis. Billy Batson is just left there. Superman's totally unconscious, and like a boss, the beast, known as Godzilla, is just roaring in the background. Why, my friends? Because he has just dominated the Man of Steel. So this initially opens up with Supergirl, and she's really important here, right? Bear with me here for a second. It has to do with Supergirl. Now, like, Flash shows up at Iron Heights prison, basically fighting what looks like Cthulhu, who's a spider. I have no idea who this guy is. We're gonna call him Cthulhu. But like, Flash is absolutely kind of not really having his powers. And the reason why is because like there's this mist which basically slows him down. And wouldn't you know, all the villains in Iron Heights just decide to take this moment to basically orchestrate a prison break, which is exactly what I would do. But because the Flash is slower than he normally is, they just start beating the crap out of the guy because, you know, when you're the fastest man alive, nothing says weakness like gas. And so basically Supergirl shows up on the scene, uses her ability to blow air, and then saves the Flash, and the villains are more or less taken care of. Here's a kicker to all of this, right? While she's there with Green Lantern, she suddenly realizes, she says Kal-El, and she's like, I can't hear his heartbeat. And Green Lantern's like, what? And she's like, I can always hear his heartbeat, always, but it's stopped. And they're like, no, there's no way Superman's dead. Son. Godzilla, in the last video we did, it turns out Godzilla killed Superman. How crazy is that, right? So then you transition to New York, right? Superman's lifeless body is just laying there. You got Billy Batson, Shazam, standing over him, just like, my God. And then Atom Smasher shows up. Now here's the thing, right? Atom Smasher, the guy's very similar to like Giant Man from Marvel Comics, right? Like his strength and so on increases proportionally with his size. This guy decides he wants to go toe to toe with Godzilla. You know what Godzilla says? You know what Godzilla says, y'all. Godzilla says, man, son, you better come strong. Dude, he whips that tail, sends that dude flying. Now the guy's trying to hold his own as best he can, right? Props to him. Props to this guy. He's doing what he can where he can. But it is Atom Smasher, right? Like, this guy sucks. So this dude just gets absolutely crushed. Hawkgirl shows up to like help Billy Batson out and is like, we got to get Superman out of here, right? Like we need to do something. We got to get this guy going, right? Get him to safety, something, because they have no idea the fact that he's dead. As far as they're concerned, he's just unconscious because Godzilla just gave him the beat down of a lifetime. But then while Billy Batson is watching all of this, he's like, yeah, we'll try to help. I'll try to offer some kind of a distraction. He looks up just in time to see Godzilla kill Atom Smasher. Godzilla, man, dude, he's leaving no crumbs. You know what I mean? Like, he's just taking it to him. So at that point, Billy's just like, okay, this guy's killing the Justice League, right? Like, this guy's got to go. So he's like, I'll distract it, get Superman out of here. And Hawkgirl's like, I'm not going to leave you. And it's like, dude, if you don't get out of here, man, like, he's like, this is all my fault. I have to fix it, yada, yada, yada. Now, here's the thing, man. One of the things to know about Billy Batson, right? Billy Batson, this dude slept on, right? Like, people don't realize, like, comic book fans know all about Billy Batson, but for non-comic book readers, they're just like, yeah, Zachary Levi, who's pissed off because James Gunn's brother gets to be in the movies and Zachary Levi might get the boot, right? Quit being jealous. So the thing about it is, like, he's a guy that people don't really realize is as capable as he is. The reality here is that Shazam, depending on who's writing the story, every bit as strong as Superman, right? Sometimes stronger if he decides to invoke magic in a fight with Superman, right? This kid calls down the lightning, right? Shazam, right? Brings Godzilla down, or at least offers a distraction. He's like, get Superman out of here. I'll lure the monster out of the city. He's like, but first, it's time for a little bit of revenge, right? They absolutely punch the crap out of Godzilla, sending this dude flying across the city into a whole bunch of buildings, killing a bunch of innocent people because the Justice League don't care about the lives of the citizens in their own city. So what you do is you transition back over to like the Flash, who's kind of doing his thing, because the reality is when Supergirl and Green Lantern took off, they just left him there, right? They were just like, we gotta go, right? And just bolted directly for Superman. But because all the villains were orchestrating a prison break, right? Like the Rogues, like Captain Cold and all these guys, launch their attack against the Flash. They just kind of momentarily freeze him. And then they start going after Green Lantern, who's kind of recovered back at the scene. And then of course you switch over to Wonder Woman and Donna Troy, who are basically dealing with a giant woolly mammoth. Nobody cares. So what you do here is you jump to Oliver Queen, the Green Arrow. But one of the things to remember is that all of this happened because Lex Luthor and his guys, messing with interdimensional travel, ended up jumping to an alternate reality where you had all these titans that we know, Godzilla, King Kong, the whole 9 yards, and inadvertently brought them into the main DC universe. Now, as interesting and cool as Green Arrow is, all those little quips and all that kind of stuff, this guy is just painfully unprepared to face off against any of these titans. The guy's got no real powers. He's got awesome arrows and he can do some cool stuff, but there's not a whole lot he can do here. He's watching King Kong, right? King Kong, the beast, right? He's watching this guy just dominating all these titans. And while it is interesting to see, the reality is that the best that he can do is just flee for his life. And even in the ensuing chaos, just like collateral damage, right? Like bodies hitting the floor and so on and so forth, Oliver Queen is just sent flying. Now, Supergirl does show up here, and initially she goes to talk to King Kong. And we know how King Kong has a thing for white chicks. She's like, I mean no harm to you, but you must back away from my friend. And King Kong just kind of looks at her for a second, and she's like, Oliver, move to a safe distance. I don't know how this is going to go. And King Kong's just kind of interested in her, right? As soon as he goes to touch her, she's like, no, right? And just punches this guy, right? Just like punches him in the face. But here's the thing, man. It ain't like when they hit Godzilla, son. It ain't like when they hit Godzilla. And like they said that guy flying. King Kong's just like, don't do that. That's literally all it is, right? He just like wipes his face and he's just like, don't do that. And so like she's absolutely pummeling King Kong, right? So literally it's Supergirl versus King Kong, which is kind of cool. I think we're all just kind of waiting for the giant fight that happens when King Kong fights Godzilla. But then you jump to Gotham City, right? Now, here's the thing. So like Batman and Batwoman along with Dinah, right? Like Black Canary and iPhone, they're kind of having this conversation. Batman says the heart rate dampening device is effectively keeping the creature sedated, right? It's kind of a stopgap until they can figure out what it is that they're gonna do. But the big question that's asked here, really by Black Canary, but kind of everybody as a whole, is where did they come from and why are they rampaging in cities? And the whole idea is, well, not really entirely sure. It all kind of seems to be a little murky. We'll have to try to get an answer to this. But Billy Batson shows up and says, it's actually my fault. I screwed up, which it kind of is, right? There's a little bit more going on behind the scenes, and we'll cover that as we get further through the story. But Billy Batson is just kind of like, yeah, I kind of goofed. I was just trying to help, right? He's kind of the one that screwed everything up. What's going on behind the scenes is him talking to the rest of the Justice League and saying, Superman is dead, right? I was just trying to help. That's where I screwed up. That's why it's my fault, because they didn't know what he was talking about, right? They were just kind of like, what's your fault, right? And he's like, Superman's dead. And the first thing Cyborg says is, we have to tell Lois, right? What does Batman say? No, we do not tell Lois Lane, right? We cannot tell Lois Lane. Do not say that. He is not dead, right? There's no way he can be. The response to Batman here, nobody says a word to Lois, not until I see Clark. Now, if you know Batman comics effectively, right? If you know Batman comics well enough, what Batman is basically saying here is it's almost kind of like a subliminal message to Godzilla, right? Godzilla, of course, can't hear it, and it's really just kind of him speaking metaphorically. Do you guys know what it is that Batman's saying? Do you guys know what Batman's saying? Here's exactly what Batman's saying. It's like El Presador said back in the day, right? Godzilla didn't beat Superman, he just pissed him off, and now he's fucked, because when Superman comes back, he's gonna be out for blood. But Batman literally has Superman in a Kryptonian healing matrix. Technically, they call it a solar array, but the whole idea is to bombard this guy with solar energy to see if they can bring him back. Now, for those of you guys who don't know about the Kryptonian healing matrix, this was introduced, it was the dumbest thing ever, right? Sidetrack from the story for a second. The death of Superman in like 1992 or whenever it was that it came out, right? Superman gets beat to death by Doomsday. The world's crying, fans are crying. It's this great big huge monumental thing, hell's bells. They even had a cover with the Superman logo in blood. It was like the biggest thing ever, right, when Superman died. So you have like all these crappy Superman who show up, although Cyborg was pretty dope. But eventually Superman comes back, right? And what you find out is he was just put in a Kryptonian healing matrix, which was basically like a Superman spa, right? He got pampered, massaged. I mean, hell, he even came back with a new hairstyle, right? The super mullet. Business in front, Hardy in the back. But the whole idea behind the Kryptonian healing matrix, in all seriousness, is that it is a way for Superman to effectively regenerate. Because what DC had established over the years in the comics is that whenever Superman endures an injury serious enough that it borderline kills him, he almost kind of goes into quote unquote hibernation, if you want to call it that. It's a very loose term to use here for what it is that he does, but it's more or less the same thing, right? And that's effectively what's happening here. The big kicker to this, right? Getting back into enjoying the story, the big kicker about this is they don't know if Superman has a heartbeat, right? Seemingly, Supergirl is the only one that seems to be able to know if that's the case. Why? I don't know, right? Maybe it's nobody has a stethoscope, or maybe you need like a super stethoscope. I have no idea, but for whatever reason, they don't know whether he's alive or dead. And even Batman is kind of like panicking in all of this. And the League figures out pretty fast what Batman needs is something to focus on. Because let me tell you something, man. Batman, dude, this guy's a walking, talking MacGuffin, right? Like Batman is prepped for everything, even things that he couldn't possibly be prepped for, right? Like Batman fights God. He's got a plan for that, right? Because, you know, Batman can just reach into his little utility belt and pull out the anti-God Batarang, right? And he defeats God, right? Batman's got, he's got a plan for everything. But when you have Batman in a situation where he's just emotionally devastated, and then you give him a target, woe betide that poor soul, because they're gonna have to deal with a pissed off Batman. And that is, man, it is a sight to behold. And so what they do is they kind of compare notes on everything that's happened so far. And they come to the realization that Lex Luthor and his forces, right, like the Legion of Doom, which is still one of the most dope names for a villain group ever, but the Legion of Doom have been messing with the Boom Tube, and they somehow got their hands on the Dream Stone. The Boom Tube was a teleportation device. It sent them to an alternate universe where Godzilla and all these monsters existed. The Dream Stone is an artifact that can bring what are essentially fictional objects or dreams into reality. In effect, it transported Godzilla and all those guys here, right? We didn't go super in-depth into it before because honestly, we didn't need to, because this is really just the simplest explanation and it's all you need. And so their idea is find the Dream Stone, we find a way to send everybody back. Is it kind of a MacGuffin? Yeah. Who cares, man? Because we're here to see monsters fight the Justice League. Who cares about the logic of whether or not it works? And so what you get is iPhone, right? Cyborg, we're calling Cyborg iPhone. You get iPhone who ends up arriving at the last known location of the beacon, which is to say, this kind of device that was emanating a signal, a pulse out there in the world that was basically drawing all the monsters. By the time iPhone gets out there, it's gone. Right? Like it's gone. Like nobody knows what in the world this thing is or what in the world was going on with it. More so than that, he tells them that like the giant crab, which I have no idea what that thing's called, that it fully submerged itself, right? The monster that was in Themyscira is making its way towards North America, and Godzilla is headed to Metropolis because, as far as they can guess anyway, it's because Superman's still alive and Godzilla wants to finish off the Man of Steel. And so what you do is you switch back over to Supergirl. Now, Supergirl and King Kong this entire time have just been doing a standoff, right? Just kind of been staring at each other. Because in the last video, King Kong tried to put hands on, and Supergirl went full Charlton Heston, right? Like, get your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape. But ever since then, like, they've just been staring at each other. And so Supergirl comes to the realization that King Kong isn't really like Godzilla, right? Just like showing up, smacking humanity around a little bit, and then leaving, right? Like he's a little more peaceful, right? A little more seemingly capable of understanding like empathy and that kind of stuff. Now, it's not to say that Godzilla does not understand empathy. It's not to say that Godzilla doesn't understand the struggle of humanity and how all the damage that he's causing is just inflicting untold horror on the human race. It's that Godzilla just doesn't care, right? Like, that's the difference, man. So the thing here is that she basically takes off to go check on Superman. She tells Oliver Queen, stay here, keep an eye on this thing, right? Of course, King Kong spins around, he's eight kinds of pissed off because Supergirl took off, right? Like the hot girl basically bailed, and now he's mad at Oliver Queen because Oliver Queen won't give him Supergirl's OnlyFans link. And so what you end up finding out is that like the two of them are being watched by the League of Assassins. They're not overly important. We're not gonna go into this. King Kong just starts smacking around the League of Assassins, honestly, because we wanna see monsters fighting the Justice League, man. We do not wanna see a guy with a bow who won't stop cracking stupid jokes, right? Like, fight some assassins, right? Like, I didn't care about Green Arrow after season 1. I don't care about his character in DC. Although the season with Prometheus was pretty dope. That was a pretty amazing season. But the fact remains here, right? Oliver Queen basically bails, jumps on a ship, and starts floating away. That'll become important once we get to the end of this comic. But switching back over to the Justice League Watchtower, we pick up with Lois Lane. Now, in all seriousness, this is something that's cool. And in fact, this is something that I really hope James Gunn eventually focuses on in Superman Legacy, or even the Superman stories that come after in the new DC universe, right? The relationship between Superman and Lois Lane. Because no, they're not married in this reality, but like, it's still Superman and Lois, right? They're the 1-2 punch of comic book couples, right? She is the first lady of comics and was at one point the quintessential damsel in distress. And so what you get here is when Lois is given the news about what happened with Superman, she literally shows up to just see him. And it's a very, very somber moment because the Justice League doesn't know if he's dead and she doesn't know if he's dead, right? And so she says, like, they said the solar array isn't healing your damaged cells. That's not going to work for me. No, not after I found this in your jacket pocket, because he was gonna pop the question to her over dinner. And she's like, it's beautiful. And my answer is yes. So Superman and Lois are gonna get married in this universe. That's awesome to see that that's still gonna happen, right? But she's like, but you are going to have to put it on my finger, so you'd better get ready because I really want to wear it. What does all this mean? It most likely means that between Lois Lane and Huey Lewis in the news, Superman will survive because that's the power of love. But you end up having like Green Lantern who shows up and kind of busts in and is like, look, I'm sorry to kind of break in with this whole thing, but we just got an emergency call from Aquaman that we need to follow up on. So do you want me to take you home? And she's like, nope, I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying here. And if you got a problem with that, you can go one-on-one with the Great One, right? And so he's just kind of like, do your thing, right? Stay here. And it makes perfect sense because for Lois, like, she's grieving the man she loves in some capacity because she doesn't know if he's actually going to die or not. She didn't even know if he's alive or not. So it's one part grieving, one part hoping. But Lois Lane, ever the detective, is one of the things that I love so much about the character of Lois, right? One of the big influences for the creation of her character was actually another fictional character named Torchy Blane. You ever get a chance? Look up Torchy Blane. It's just an amazing concept, right? Like a do whatever it takes to get the story reporter. Like it's one of the coolest things. But the whole thing is Lois starts going through all the video footage that the Justice League has at their disposal. And she just like makes a call and she's like, it's Lois. Tell me every move Lex Luthor's made in the past 24 hours. And they're like, what am I looking for? And she's like, a red stone, right? So she's basically on the hunt for the dream stone. We don't really know who she's talking to, but she's talking to somebody who's probably gonna show up and play a pretty significant role here. But for the rest of the Justice League themselves, they show up in Atlantis, where you have Aquaman facing off against a giant sea monster. Now, I have no idea what this thing's called, and a part of me wants to call it Steve. But the big thing here is Justice League kind of asked the question, you talk to fish, why don't you talk to that, right? But in all seriousness, right, like this thing represents a clear and present danger to Atlantis, right? Like it's just destroying seemingly everything in sight. A lot of the sea creatures like giant squid and sharks and things like that, Aquaman's been sending those things after it and it's been killing them all. Honestly, I'm not gonna lie, a part of it's kind of funny, right? Like Aquaman and his aquatic friends doing the best they can to protect Atlantis from a giant monster. But like he's sending everything in, right? Great white sharks, giant squid, a crab, right? Like he's sending in all kinds of stuff and nothing's happening, right? Like nothing can be done against this overwhelming force. And so what the Justice League puts together is that there's actually multiple beacons that are out there in the world, and they are all drawing these things to particular locations. Specifically, one is being drawn here to Atlantis. Now, putting two and two together, of course, these beacons are basically in places where the creatures will show up and then hopefully kill members of the Justice League. But the thing about this is that they kind of ask the question, how do we defeat this thing, right? Because one of the first things it does is just blow out a whole bunch of ink, and they're like, that can't really be its only true defense. And of course, Green Lantern kind of protects everybody using his Green Lantern, powers, his hard light constructs and whatnot. But they come to this realization that there's something else on its way, right? Because literally they're told by iPhone, right? Yes, like there is a beacon down there and you guys need to figure out what's going on. But that's not your biggest issue, right? Like the biggest issue you have is that the Metropolis monster is making its way over there. Godzilla is coming, right? This thing shows up and just, of course, as you guys know, right? Like you guys, man, y'all know what's coming. Y'all know what's coming. You get that wom, 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 and you just blam! I blast this thing with the atomic breath like a beast. And then literally Green Lantern just turns into like Ken Watanabe from Godzilla 2014, right? Just let them fight. And so like they just back off and they let Godzilla and this thing just go at it with each other. And for the most part, Godzilla looks like he's actually getting wrecked, but then Godzilla turns around, puts his atomic breath back on this guy and helps him understand his place in the bigger picture. And so because of the fact that the fight between Godzilla and this thing is now really more dangerous than it was before, because before, even though it was kind of a crappy thing to do, sea life could be sacrificed in the name of preservation, right? Like Godzilla is its own thinking, feeling monster, and who knows what could happen in terms of collateral damage. In fact, the fight between these two could actually lay waste to the entire city of Atlantis. Well, really the kingdom of Atlantis. So Aquaman does the only thing he can do. He heads down into the bowels of the kingdom of Atlantis towards a mighty chain, which he unlocks and releases the Kraken. Dude, it is amazing. Like literally the Kraken gets released and it's only a matter of time before stuff pops off, because what you do here is you switch back over to Oliver Queen, and Oliver Queen on this boat, stowing away, ends up coming across the head of this just gigantic skull, right? This gigantic creature. I have no idea what it is, but I'm not gonna lie here, guys. Part of me wants to believe that it's one of the heads of King Ghidorah. I don't know if it is, but if it is, man, son, dude, things are gonna go sideways so fast. Picking up where we left off in the last video, we got Godzilla and we got the Kraken and we got some monster whose name I don't know that I'm sure you typed in the comments, but I'm gonna call him Tim. So what we get is like this three-way battle between these guys, and Aquaman and Mera and Wonder Woman and all these folks are just kind of watching it all go down. Because what are they gonna do? Right? I mean, well, one, the whole idea was to unleash the Kraken so it could fight Godzilla, so they could keep Godzilla from destroying Atlantis. Because as you guys know, from the last videos that we've done, there are beacons at different places around the world that have been planted there for the purpose of summoning Godzilla. Now, what we're going to find out at the end of all this is that this is actually just a distraction. Right? Like Godzilla facing off against the Justice League in these different locations is all a distraction by Lex Luthor, who we already knew was a part of the story, and it's really, really dope. But basically, the fight between these guys goes exactly the way that you would think, right? It's just bare knuckle brawling, right? Just like punching each other, hitting each other and everything. And it's pretty dope. Now, of course, Green Lantern shows up and he just wraps up Tim in a Green Lantern hard light construct net, which is kind of cool, I guess, right? It just sort of keeps him away from the main fight per se. And then the Kraken gets the upper hand on Godzilla, right? Like literally the Kraken gets the upper hand on this guy, right? And the thing is, like, while they're trying to get the beacon out of there as fast as possible, there is collateral damage, right? Like the dome's cracking and all that kind of stuff. So Green Lantern is basically forced to like allow Tim to escape, to go after the Flash, right, who's just swimming as fast as he can, because when you can't run on a hard surface, you can't run at the speed of light. So, right, he's just swimming really fast. The guy's trying to get out of there as fast as he can. Green Lantern's got to like put a hard light construct bubble around the dome in order to keep everybody in there safe and keep them alive and from being destroyed by everything. And they're just kind of like watching on. But finally, the Kraken gets his claws on Godzilla. And at that point, Wonder Woman and Aquaman are like, cool, so the Kraken's got Godzilla. We'll go do our thing. Wrong, because we don't even get to see it. We don't get the we don't even get any of that. We just see the atomic breath just fire off, and presumably the Kraken is just totally obliterated. And they're like, no, like, what are we gonna do, right? So like, Green Lantern to the rescue, hard light construct over the dome, and now they're just kind of stuck there trying to figure out what comes next. Now at that point, we switch over with Oliver Queen. Yes, I know, the head of the thing that Oliver Queen saw was one of those crawler thingies from Skull Island. I get that. Let me want to believe that it's King Ghidorah. Let me have my fantasy, guys. You don't have to deuce all over my fantasy, my hopes and dreams, because it'd be awesome if it was King Ghidorah. But this is where the League of Assassins comes into play. No, not the League of Shadows. League of Shadows was made for the Dark Knight Rises movie, and then eventually it was adapted to the comic books. It's always been the League of Assassins in DC Comics. But Oliver Queen shows up here, and ever the guy who is kind of goofy and silly, but also has it where it counts, then he's just kind of like musing to himself, only to like crawl out from under where he's hiding and be encountered by like a boatload of the League of Assassins. And he makes this like hilarious comment. He's like, was I saying all that stuff out loud? And they're like, no. And he's like, well, it doesn't matter anyway. So like, he goes to attack these guys as best he can. But for the most part, there's only so much he can do. Oliver Queen's cool, but he's not like this nigh indestructible guy. So he ends up just firing off this arrow that creates an explosion. It basically offers a distraction, and the guy makes his escape, right? Just like jumps out into the water, and he's like, okay, so like the League of Assassins is involved in this. We're gonna need more help. As if the Justice League wasn't stretched thin enough as it is. Now, here's the thing. Here's where stuff gets really cool here. So what you do is you pick up with iPhone, right? And as he's like flying and heading towards Batman, by the way, for those of you guys who are new to this video, we're calling Cyborg iPhone, right? I mean, because it makes the most logical sense, right? The guy's a walking, talking iPhone, you know? But anyway, so him and Batman are talking to each other, and basically you end up finding out that like when they had raided the files of Lex Luthor and all his forces, they had basically raided the files that included Monarch. Now, this is one of the things that like Lex Luthor and his guys are already well aware of, and the Justice League is just now learning this. Now, as we know, as the viewing audience, right, as the people who are reading this comic, Monarch is the organization that has been studying the Titans, like in that universe where Godzilla and Kong and all these monsters come from, right? Remember, at the very beginning of this video, they were yanked from that universe and brought into this universe. And so with all this information about Monarch really available to the Justice League, iPhone makes this comment where he says, I sent out a summary of the Monarch files highlighting all of the Titans' known strengths and weaknesses. Now, Batman, of course, says, I'm reviewing it now. What's happening in Atlantis? The response of iPhone, waiting for an update and nothing yet from Shazam, who's MIA, or Green Arrow on Skull Island. Supergirl is headed back there to check on the ape called Kong. Based on what's in those files, Kong is as close to a good guy as you'll find among the Titans. So like, they're building up to bringing Kong in. Finally, we're 4 issues in, and Kong has just been sitting on an island over there somewhere. Like, it's just like, okay, come on, guys, do something. It's better not be one of those stories where like Kong comes in at the last minute, right? It's gonna piss me off. And so Batman's like, okay, so like if we can make a 300-foot tall ally, like that's awesome. And he's like, by the way, have you checked on the specs that I sent you? And the response of iPhone is, yes, that's a very ambitious plan. And Batman's like, but with the help of the Flash and his friends, we're going to be able to make this work, because what they're doing is they're building the cosmic treadmill. Now, this is cool, right? Because the cosmic treadmill, you don't really see very often. But for those of you guys who don't know about it, the cosmic treadmill, it basically allows a user to go backward or forward in time, depending on what kind of radiation they use, right? Positive radiation sends you into the future, negative radiation sends you into the past, right? But the fact is, they're working on bringing the cosmic treadmill back, but they're using Wally to seemingly power the treadmill, or at the very least, a kind of interim use for the treadmill. Most likely it will go to Barry, right? The cosmic treadmill and Barry Allen are just like inexorably intertwined because it really all started with him. And that's when you pick up with Supergirl, who's headed back over to Skull Island in order to recruit King Kong. But when she gets there, we end up finding out that like Gorilla Grodd and Gorilla City have shown up there to like bow down to the power of Kong. And on one hand, it seems kind of silly, but on the other hand, it makes perfect sense, because if you were a member of Gorilla City and a 300-foot tall gorilla just appeared in your reality, you would probably worship it as your god as well. Although technically, Gorilla Grodd did this when he first encountered Kong back when they had initially gone over to that universe. So he's already like assuming that this is like a god of some kind, and most likely just told everybody else in Gorilla City, hey guys, there's like a 300-foot tall gorilla over there and he's our god. Let's go. Right. And then like they head over there. And like, that's where they are now. Now, the cool thing here is you would expect Supergirl to be able to like just overpower these guys in an instant, right? Because when it comes to like Gorilla Grodd's telepathy, his ability to mind control people, Supergirl can overcome that, right? Initially, the idea seemed to be that he was trying to use it on Kong. But what Gorilla Grodd does is he reveals that he's got a green kryptonite horn. And what this does is it exposes Supergirl to green kryptonite radiation. And then because of that, it allows his telepathy to overtake Supergirl. And so King Kong, who's just been down bad for Supergirl this entire time, right? Smitten with this chick, right? You know how they always say the worst thing she could do is say no? Nope. The worst thing she could do is just beat you into submission, because that's exactly what Supergirl does. She just starts pummeling this guy, right? So, hey, you know, when it comes to asking girls out, you pay your money and take your chances. I don't know what to tell you, right? Dating in 2024, it's a struggle for everybody. So what you do here is you switch back over to Shazam. And Shazam has, for the most part, just been punishing himself. Now, the reason for this, as we covered in the previous videos, is that Shazam was there when Superman was hit, because Superman is, by all standards of measurement, dead. Right? Like, if he's not dead, he's certainly dying, right? That's basically what's going on here. And so because of that, he kind of sees himself as the fault of it all, which is basically true. I mean, it is kind of Billy Batson's fault. Technically, it's Godzilla's fault, but Billy Batson didn't do anything to make things better. And so because of that, Batman kind of tells him, like, stop punishing yourself, all that kind of stuff, take your anger and channel it into something constructive, which is actually a great thing for him to do, right? I mean, the worst thing you could do in a state of, like, high emotional duress is become self-destructive. That's how you end up completely and totally destroying your life, or potentially something worse, right? But the fact is, Billy Batson doesn't want to hear it, because what he's doing is heading directly to the headquarters of Lex and all his guys. And while he is able to hold his own for a little bit, at the end of the day, despite how powerful he is, he can't hold all these guys off, because it's basically every villain in the DC universe of any measurable power who's here, right? And so Billy Batson fighting these guys as best he can, and he's putting in the work. I mean, he's putting in the work. Understand, son. What's happening here? Billy Batson is putting in the work against these guys, right? Because you got Captain Cold who shows up. Billy Batson's like, man, son, you better come strong, right? And then you have like Mongol who appears. He's like, bruh, like this is not gonna do it. But then Giganta comes out of nowhere and says, no, but I can do it, and just bam! One punches this guy, which I guess when you're like a 50-foot tall woman with super strength makes it very easy to do. But the fact remains here, right? Switching back over to Hal Jordan in Atlantis, using his heart-like constructs to try to keep this dome from collapsing in on itself, that he is struggling to make this happen, because it's not even really just like a matter of willpower. As most of you guys who are aware of the Green Lantern mythos know, Green Lanterns derive their power from willpower, and Hal Jordan's willpower is basically limitless, right? It was of such a high level, the guy forged his own ring out of just sheer will. I mean, it's just kind of nuts, right? It'd be like you just being like, I really, really want this. And then it comes into existence. It's nuts, right? It's crazy that he was able to pull that off. But the fact is, the weight of 10,000 pounds of pressure of the ocean pushing around on him, that will take its toll on you. Because unlike Aquaman or Mera or any of the other Atlantean soldiers that are out there, they're acclimated to this environment. Hal Jordan is not. And so the pressure ultimately begins to get to him. The hard-like construct starts to collapse, the dome is out there, but at the last minute, Jon Stewart, Jessica Cruz, Guy Gardner, and Simon Baz show up, right? They literally come out and bail this guy out, right? They put the hard-like constructs in there, which I know you guys are excited to see Jon Stewart and Guy Gardner. Jessica Cruz and Simon Baz, I guess, they're okay. But like, it is cool to see these dudes show up, right? So they bail out Hal Jordan. You have Godzilla, who's just like sitting there after having destroyed the Kraken, and then Aquaman ends up putting this nth metal chain around Godzilla's foot. Now, what that means, for those of you guys who don't know, nth metal is about as close as you get to something comparable to like Uru metal or adamantium for Marvel Comics, maybe a hybrid of both, but it's an incredibly durable metal. I guess technically, what is it, Prometheum metal, I think it is, in DC Comics is similar to adamantium. No, it doesn't matter. It's just one of DC's most durable metals, and probably the strongest metal in existence. And so the fact that it will hold Godzilla in place, this allows us to switch over to Lex Luthor. And this is where son, this is where it's gonna blow your socks off. Because Lex Luthor asked this question, is the connection stable, right? This voice comes in online for 90 minutes and counting, the system is stable. Lex Luthor, then let's do it, execute link up. And he says, I'm live. And this person's like, how does it feel, Mr. Luthor? And he's like, powerful. And so this person's like, don't mean to interrupt your moment, Lex, but I count 4 Titans heading back your way. MechaGodzilla must have a beacon built into its system. We should locate and deactivate. The response of Lex? No, let them come. They need to learn who the true alpha is. Now, MechaGodzilla is awesome. MechaGodzilla is awesome. But here's the thing. At that point, what you do is you switch over to Ra's al Ghul and the Lazarus Pits, because the League of Assassins is flying in that skull. And the idea is to drop it into this volcano, right? This Lazarus volcano, because presumably what it will do is restore this thing back to life. And so now what you're going to have is not just all these Titans running around, you're going to potentially have a world-killing monster running around as well that literally burrows into the earth and kills a planet. So what this does is this picks up with iPhone talking to the Justice League, right? And he's like, okay, I wish I could say that the worst is behind us because we're 10 days after all the Titans appeared, Godzilla, Kong, all those guys. And he says, but the data tells us that our troubles are just beginning. Superman's down, Supergirl is missing, and Shazam is likely a hostage of the Legion of Doom. We're no closer to finding Toyman and the Dreamstone than we were a week ago. Now, here's the important thing. The reason why Toyman and the Dreamstone is important, really the Dreamstone more than anything else, it's how the Legion of Doom would wish all the Titans back to their own reality when everything got sorted out. That's literally why the Titans are here, to basically destroy the Justice League. And they're doing it, man. Like, Godzilla took out Superman in the very first issue. Shazam went to go fight the Legion of Doom, and he was overpowered pretty quickly. Supergirl is doing her whole thing with Gorilla Grodd, and God only knows what those two are getting up to. But here's the funny thing, right? Aquaman chimes in and says, but it's not all bad news, guys. It's not all bad news, my fellow Justice Leaguers. The Atlantis dome repair and reinforcement is almost complete. We'll be ready for another attack. And the rest of the Justice League is like, oh, well, thank God for small favors, Aquaman, because the safety and security of a dome full of fish people was at the top of our list. With everything going on, well, that's fantastic news, Aquaman. No one cares. Go protest along John Silver's. But then you switch over to Batman, and the hits keep coming, man. The punches keep coming. Because then, with Batman, you have it established that yes, Godzilla is trapped under the ocean with nth metal chains. He cannot conceivably escape, right? There's no way for him to get out. He's just not powerful enough to do it. Which, by the way, for all you Godzilla fans out there, can he drown? Can Godzilla drown? Or is it just like he has gills or something, right? Like through the power of the plot, he can spend as much time underwater as he wants to. I have no clue. But they still have like 3 other Titans that are seemingly comparable to Godzilla that are making their way to Metropolis, right? The woolly mammoth Titan and the Spider-Man Titan and the Dragon Titan thing. I don't know anything about these characters, man. I know Godzilla, Muto, Mothra, and like Rodan and King Kong. And like, that's it, right? And according to Mariah, Rodan is he's a lazy guy, right? So here's the thing. What you do is you switch over to like, what's going on? with King Kong. Because for like the whole part of this story, like the whole very beginning of this, King Kong was just like on an island over there, doing nothing, basically just totally smitten with Supergirl. He tried to put hands on, and then she helped him understand that that's not okay. But like, that's really all you had. That's really all you had. And so what we end up finding out, of course, is, as we covered in the last video, that Gorilla Grodd, with his power of telepathy, had used green kryptonite to allow his telepathy to influence Supergirl. So he was controlling her, and seemingly by controlling her, he controls Kong. So like, it's kind of crazy, right? It's a little weird and wonky because Kong is like, well, I guess simp is the word. He'll do whatever Supergirl tells him to, right? Like, he's just that smitten over that girl, which is kind of wild. But then you have like the whole thing with Superman, because what you have Batman doing is he says the Titans are headed to Metropolis, paths are being cleared to minimize damage, and the city's being evacuated. Make whatever final preparations you need to get ready. We make our final stand in Metropolis in Centennial Park. But then you have like Nightwing and Batman that are talking about Superman, because he's been out of commission this entire time, right? Just been out of it ever since Godzilla just smacked him around and helped him understand his place in the bigger picture. And so it's just kind of like still leaving people flabbergasted, right? Like, what do we do without Superman? Because the Justice League without Superman is just like a team full of folks who can do some cool stuff sometimes, I guess. And so it's just like, what do we do, right? Batman tells them all, get out there, make your preparations. I will meet you all out there. So what it does is it puts on this idea that Batman is doing something with Superman's body to kind of help rejuvenate him. I don't know if that's true, and we'll find out at the end of the comic, because Lois Lane wakes up and Superman's gone. Like, his body is nowhere to be found. And so it's like, did Batman just supernap Superman? Is that really what he just did? But then you switch over to the Legion of Doom. Now, normally I would skip over this because literally the Legion of Doom just hasn't been doing anything important at all this entire story, outside of being the catalyst for why all the Titans are here in the first place. But what it does is it reveals that Lex Luthor is wearing a kryptonite-powered suit, piloting the MechaGodzilla. Now, here's a kicker about all this, right? One of the things to know is Lex Luthor didn't just make MechaGodzilla on his own. He did, but he didn't, right? When the Legion of Doom went to the alternate reality and they got their hands on the Titans and brought them back, they also learned about Monarch. And anybody who follows the Godzilla mythos right now knows that Monarch is like the big organization that is investigating the Titans, learning about the Titans' strengths, weaknesses, all that kind of stuff, and developing countermeasures. MechaGodzilla, within the confines of this story, was one of the countermeasures developed by Monarch. And so Lex Luthor getting his hands on those plans allowed him to bring them here into the DC universe and then use them to start building MechaGodzilla. Now, here's the funny thing about this, right? Because he shows up on the scene and his idea is that he will demonstrate, basically by sheer force of power, to all the other Titans that he is the king of the monsters, right? The apex, the alpha, right? Whatever it is that you want to call it. And he's like, this is really interesting, because like all the pieces are falling into place. And he's like, this is really interesting, because when they arrive on the scene, Batman shows up in this just giant Jaeger suit, right? His own, Godzilla Buster armor, if you want to call it that, right? And it's like, of course Batman's been building his own giant robot. Why wouldn't he? And the question's even asked. Lex Luthor says, kudos, all I did was put this MechaGodzilla back together using everything that I had from Monarch. How'd you build yours so fast? And Batman's like, prep time, because when you have the power of prep time, you don't have to explain shit. So when Batman starts putting it all together, it's just total a team effort, right? Whatever, man, like, it's the power of prep time, right? We built a giant Jaeger suit in the span of 15 minutes, right? Because, like prep time, whatever. But Batman, with his suit, is designed to face off against the Titans, meaning it is designed to face off against MechaGodzilla. And it's dope, right? Like, the fight between the two is solid, but here's the issue. All these other Titans have shown up here as well. And so what happens is the Green Lanterns, along with the other different superhero teams in DC Comics, they all start branching off and facing off against these different Titans. So it's like this just gigantic battle royale, right? Like, in the city. Like, it's nuts. The Green Lanterns, and you guys aren't even gonna believe this, the Green Lanterns, they form a Megazord, son! They literally bring all their light constructs together and form a Megazord, which is going to be dope to see until the Green Power Ranger shows up and then wrecks them all and destroys the Megazord, because the Green Ranger was better than the White Ranger. I don't care what anybody says. So once these guys all come together, right, like you have Donna Troy and you've got Wonder Woman, which Donna Troy is kind of like a poor man's Wonder Woman. Like Wonder Woman is the celebrity. Donna Troy is like a few steps down, right? Like the one you actually have a chance to date. Like that's the one that I'm talking about. That's Donna Troy. But like these two show up, right? They do their little bit of a damage here and there. You get like Red Hood and you get Damian Wayne who show up here, and what actually is the Batwing that turns into its own mini robot. And I gotta be honest with you guys, man, if this thing is available for purchase, I would buy it, bro. Like I'd buy that and put it on a shelf downstairs. All the other comic book memorabilia, like my autographed copy of the first appearance of Reverse Flash in DC Comics, man, it was dope. But this fight is pretty fantastic because everybody's doing what they can against these guys. But then Supergirl and King Kong enter the fray. And that's when everything starts to shift and starts to change. Because Supergirl is more than enough for like Wonder Woman, Donna Troy, really any of the superheroes here. Because she's right up there with Superman. And so initially they don't realize, especially like Wonder Woman and those guys, they don't realize what's happened here, because as far as they know, again, like as we discussed in the beginning of the video, Supergirl just vanished, right? They don't know what it was that happened to her. But once Grodd shows up on the scene with a green kryptonite horn and reveals that he's controlling Supergirl, then they become like the main focus, the one person they have to focus on. Now Kong shows up here and this guy immediately just starts taking out these other Titans, as you would expect, because King Kong's better than Godzilla. But he starts taking out every single one of these Titans and wrecking every single one of these guys. And then at that point, he turns on the Green Lanterns, right? Now, the Green Lanterns are cool and everything, right? They got their Megazord and all that kind of stuff. They're the ones who figure out that Gorilla Grodd is mind controlling Supergirl. So it's like, okay, we got to go deal with her. But before they can, the fight comes down to like the Green Lanterns and King Kong. King Kong, right? They go throw a punch, right? They go to throw a punch here. King Kong's like, man, son, you better come strong, boy. He catches his hand, rips it right off, right? Like rips that thing off his shoulders, throws it on the ground, and it's like, dude, is that the best you guys got? Right? Punching me with a giant green robot, right? Like, come on, man. You look like a walking, talking thing of Jello. No conceivable way you're gonna beat me with the power of love and thought. That's not gonna happen. So literally this arm belonged to Guy Gardner, right? Like one of the Green Lanterns. This guy goes flying out of it, lands on the ground, and then he immediately turns his attention to like Gorilla Grodd, right? Because like Gorilla Grodd's there on the scene. Gorilla Grodd kills him immediately, right? Literally steps on his head and smashes it. And this is one of those moments, right, where the story's going in a direction where like all the different superheroes are losing, right? And like you expect like Superman to show up and save the day. Nope. Wrong. Guess who does show up to save the day, guys? Aquaman shows up. No, I'm just messing around. I mean, it is Aquaman, but I'm not going to make fun of Aquaman anymore. But Aquaman does show up on the scene, right? So like this kind of helps bolster things because Aquaman is murky, right? Aquaman is really, really weird. So if you guys ever read DC Rebirth, there's a story where like in Aquaman Rebirth, I want to say it was Aquaman Rebirth, where he overpowered Superman. So like, it's a little weird because that was like the super strong version of Superman. Like he was ridiculously capable. So like Aquaman can do some stuff, right? Is he enough to turn the tide against like the forces of Gorilla Grodd and the entire Legion of Doom? I'm not 100% sure. But then like Kid Flash shows up and he's been playing Street Fighter because he uses E Honda's 100-hand slap, right? Just like, right? It's like punches the crap out of this guy. And then it all just kind of comes down to like Batman and Lex Luthor versus King Kong, right? And in fact, it's actually King Kong who starts going after Batman. So then what you get here in a moment that I was so excited to see, I didn't know it would happen this soon, but I was so excited to see Beast Boy, right? Now, Beast Boy can turn into virtually any animal, right? I mean, this guy is legit. He can really shapeshift into almost anything that like he can imagine, right? It's crazy how this dude's powers work. Beast Boy shows up here and turns into his own variation of like King Kong. So you basically get like Beast Boy King Kong versus King Kong proper. And he's able to seemingly hold his own for a while because at the end of the day, I mean, the strength and ability of Kong is much more than any normal superhero on Earth outside of like the ones who were ultra strong. But if somebody can like turn themselves into King Kong with all the muscle mass and everything that goes with it, sure, they're going to be equally capable. But then that's when you start to realize that they have to take out the horn of Gorilla Grodd, right? The kryptonite horn, in order to release his mind control over Supergirl, because King Kong is still under the control of Supergirl and even Gorilla Grodd. And so what ends up happening is Green Arrow tries to fire a shot to take this thing out. It doesn't work, but then the helmet is blown off by the combined effort of Damian Wayne and Jason Todd. Really more Jason Todd than anything else, because that guy, man, that guy's just got precision aim, right? I mean, it's absolutely nuts. He takes that thing off, and then Supergirl and Kong go back to their normal selves. And it's like, man, I think we've been on the wrong side. You think, right? Like, you think. And that's when you have the Green Lanterns who show up, and they're like, Gorilla Grodd killed Guy Gardner, so now we gotta kill Gorilla Grodd. But in the midst of all that, the League of Assassins show up. And when they do, they bring a Skullcrawler with them. Because remember, the League of Assassins got their hands on one of the Skullcrawler skulls. I wanted to believe it was a skull of King Ghidorah, but you guys were just hell-bent on just raining on my parade and destroying my fun. I don't know why. That was pretty hardcore, guys. That was pretty crushing. Emotionally, not gonna lie. Right? But with the Skullcrawler being here, and really just kind of a bunch of Skullcrawlers, these are native to Skull Island, right? They only ever really fight King Kong, but you release them on the world, and God only knows what's gonna happen, right? So this complicates things even more. But then you get to the ending of this, ladies and gentlemen. You get to the ending of this, right? And this meteor flying across the sky, right? Smashes down into the water where Godzilla's at. And this voice just says, Godzilla, we have unfinished business. Superman is back, son! And it's time for Superman and Godzilla round 2, baby. And I can tell you right now, son, this next comic, bros, man, it's gonna be bonkers. I told you guys this ending was crazy. So what this does is this picks up about 10 minutes before the ending of the previous video that we did with the return of Superman. Because if you guys recall, at the very beginning of this story, Godzilla and Superman fought one another. And Godzilla helped Superman to understand his place in the bigger picture. And so Superman was basically down for the count. He was taken out like that. It was kind of nuts, right? It was mind-blowing. You guys were flipping out in the comments section, like, how in the world does Superman lose to Godzilla? Well, he lost the way that he lost in the comic. That's how he loses to Godzilla. So what he does is he explains everything to Lois in terms of how he's back, because the initial intention here of like Batman and iPhone, that's the name we use for Cyborg in DC Comics, he's a walking talking iPhone, that what they had done is they had put him in a kind of healing matrix, not the kind they use after the death of Superman is a massive plot device to bring his character back, but the reality is that it just wasn't enough. And so what Batman and Cyborg did is they used the device to create a kind of boom tube to teleport Superman to the sun. And of course, as we know, Superman, basically healing by solar radiation, ended up healing rapidly because of the sun. And so in this moment, one of the cool things you get here is he finally gets to ask Lois to marry him, which is what he was in the process of doing when Godzilla and King Kong attacked. Now again, for those of you guys who are catching up, we'll talk about how they arrived here in the first place, but there is a playlist that I'll link to at the end of this video that has all the videos we've done up to this point, in case you're kind of jumping in for the very first time. But the important thing is that once he asks Lois to marry him, he basically bails out, right? He goes to deal with all the stuff because Lois is like, you need to go be Superman. There'll be time for touching naughty bits later on. And so what you do is you switch over to Deathstroke and Cheetah, one of like the 3 or 4 times she's ever been relevant in the history of DC Comics. And they're actually on the hunt for Toyman. Now this is when we get into kind of an explanation, a little bit of exposition in terms of how all this happened. That what ended up taking place in the first issue of the comic is Lex Luthor and the Legion of Doom had basically got a hold of what was called the Dreamstone. And the Dreamstone is literally this rock that allows you to turn dreams into reality, or to pull things in from other dimensions. In this instance, they were yanked over to the dimension of Godzilla and King Kong, and then brought them alongside all the other Titans over into the main DC universe. The crazy thing about this is that everybody has been on the hunt for Toyman this entire time. And what we end up finding out is he's been dead this whole time. As soon as Godzilla showed up, he stepped on the guy and he killed him. So the question now is, where's the Dreamstone? Because seemingly it's the only way to send Godzilla and Kong and all the other Titans back to where they came from. Speaking of which, we jump over with like Kong and MechaGodzilla, because that was part of the plan of Lex Luthor, and really it seemed to be the conclusion of his plan, essentially using the plans of MechaGodzilla to create his own kind of Jaeger, basically, right? Just a giant MechaGodzilla. And he was wreaking havoc, man. Dude, this guy was just wreaking havoc across Metropolis. But of course, this led to all the Titans converging into one location. Now, what you also have here is a giant mutated version of the Skullcrawler. I think it's called a Skullcrawler. For those of you guys who are just joining with us, whenever I don't know the names of these particular Titans, I just give them names. Like, one of them is named Steve. I don't remember which one, and it'll probably change over the course of this video, but I just give them arbitrary names because, honestly, I think it's more entertaining. But this Skullcrawler, if that's what it is, I don't remember the name, we're gonna call him Jason, right? This dude is just like wreaking havoc among all the other Titans that are here, right? Now, of course, it all kind of comes down to Kong, but don't really misunderstand what's happening. It's just kind of a free-for-all, right? Like, it's a battle royale, and that's really what's throwing the Justice League off by and large here, is because of the fact that there really is no order. There really isn't like a side to join in this particular instance. So they're trying to stave off as much destruction as they possibly can while trying to quell this fight as best they can. But they're dealing with forces that they don't fully comprehend. There's no real salient method of communication among these different Titans as far as the Justice League is concerned. So Batman in his giant anti-Godzilla Batman suit, which is amazing, right? This guy's just like punching dudes left and right as best he can, but he's largely facing off against Lex. The problem is that in the midst of all of this, Guy Gardner from the Green Lanterns is killed. And I gotta say, man, I'm a little disappointed because I feel like in recent years, Guy Gardner's just kind of become the whipping boy for the Green Lanterns, right? Like, do we need a character to die in a story with the Green Lanterns? Time for Guy Gardner, right? We're gonna send you the way of Black Bolt and the Inhumans, right? It kind of sucks. Now, one of the other cool things that goes on here is that Jessica Cruz, another Green Lantern, ends up waking up Beast Boy using smelling salts. And I didn't know that like they had those things on them. Those of you guys who are familiar with smelling salts, those are the things they use when you get your clock cleaned, right? When somebody just knocks you out just hardcore, the way Mike Tyson's gonna knock out Jake Paul. They use smelling salts to wake you up, so don't be surprised if you see them using those on Jake Paul, because that dude don't stand a chance. But what happens is when Beast Boy wakes up, it's actually one of the most beneficial characters they could have in their arsenal. But an important distinction to recognize here is that the ring of Guy Gardner leaves. Now that's something that I want you to keep in the back of your head because it comes back, right? And it's dope when it happens, right? It's dope, son. And so what you do is you switch over to King Kong fighting against Jason. And it's not really anything that King Kong is unfamiliar with, right? I mean, those of you guys who have seen Skull Island and so on, you guys know that like he's well versed in facing off against these things. The only real variable here is Jason's size, right? How big this guy is. But in the midst of all of this, Beast Boy turns into effectively his own version of King Kong and joins in. And that's why I say Beast Boy is very, very powerful and very, very capable. There was, what is it, like Beast World or something like that, the story that came out recently in DC Comics. We haven't covered it because we haven't covered DC in so long, because honestly they haven't really released very many good stories. But that one really like shows how powerful Beast Boy is. Let me know down in the comments if you guys want me to cover it, because that dude is next level overpowered. In fact, I feel like he kills all the superheroes. But beyond that, it really just kind of comes down to the Justice League basically reining all these things in, right? These Skullcrawlers and whatnot, these variants of Jason, right? Just kind of reining all these things in as best they can and trying to bring some measure of order to the chaos. But the other part of this is Lex Luthor, right? That now some measure of order has been returned, that the main focus has to be the MechaGodzilla. And he gets dealt with pretty quickly. But one of the other things that you guys remember from the other videos that we covered is Shazam, right? This guy was captured by the Legion of Doom. Now, a lot of it was just him flying in reckless because Superman being defeated by Godzilla in the first issue largely came by way of the fact that Shazam was more of a distraction than anything else. And in a moment when Superman was just not quite paying attention the way he should have, that's when Godzilla overpowered him. Now, Godzilla would have overpowered him anyway, but that's when it ended up happening. And so, of course, Superman races off to the Legion headquarters and then rescues Shazam. So what you have with him here, alongside Supergirl, Kara Zor-El, and Superman, you've got like 3 more or less Superman-esque characters who are on the battlefield, right? If this is a game of chess, we got 3 queens on the board, right? It's game over. And so, of course, Shazam does a little bit of apologizing and, hey man, I'm sorry that I essentially got you killed. My bad, bro. Superman's like, it's cool, man. And like he races off to basically deal with one last thing. Now for Lex Luthor, and with Shazam showing up here on the scene, the tables turn incredibly fast, because now you have all these other Titans to contend with alongside Lex Luthor and his MechaGodzilla. Now, of course, the Green Lanterns show up here in their giant suits of armor, and they're basically able to kind of unify, not that different from like a Megazord, and in turn, like they offer assistance to Batman, and it allows everybody else to just kind of get in there, deal with the Titans and so on and so forth, and not necessarily destroy them, but basically just kind of like defeat them as best they can. And they do a great job, right? Truth to tell, like they do a great job of pulling this off. But even with King Kong and Jason, there's still this issue of Jason being that powerful and that strong and getting the upper hand on Kong. So what happens, ladies and gentlemen? I told you guys that lantern ring was gonna come back. And I told you it's gonna be this ridiculous moment, because this ring zooms past Jessica Cruz, like what in the heck? And bonds itself to King Kong. King Kong becomes a Green Lantern, and it's dope, because the first thing this guy does is use a hard light construct in the form of like his battle axe. Now, one of the things to remember about Green Lanterns, for those of you guys who are unfamiliar with them, technically they are the strongest beings in the universe. And to the question that those of you guys who are unfamiliar with DC Comics are going to ask, has there ever been an instance where Superman has been a lantern? The answer to that is yes, and in fact, there was a character who was a Daxamite, basically a Kryptonian who left Kryptonite and went to a planet called Daxam. I don't remember his name, but he was effectively every bit as strong as Superman and was also a Green Lantern. And he got wrecked by Superboy Prime in the Sinestro Corps War. I'm pretty sure it was the Sinestro Corps War. It was amazing, dude, it was so cool. Like, honestly, we should probably just link these playlists down in the description because there's so many of them that we're referencing here. But King Kong as a Green Lantern is cool. But Green Lanterns are all about imagination, right? It's why Kyle Rayner, the Green Lantern, creates these just crazy looking constructs, and Hal Jordan just creates like a giant boxing glove. Because Hal Jordan is really, really cool. He's awesome. He's not nearly as imaginative as somebody like Kyle Rayner. But King Kong is not the sharpest tool in the shed. Let's just call it for what it is, right? He's just a great big huge ape. So what he does is he conjures the things he knows. Now, would it be dope if King Kong like conjured an army of Kongs? Yes, that would be cool. It'd be horrifying for the Justice League, but it would be cool, right? But the fact is, like, that's why he's using this in a simplified form. And so all these roads start to converge into one another when you have Superman who travels to go see Godzilla. And that's where the last video that we had left off at, right? Superman just showing up and saying, we need to talk. Now, of course, Godzilla, for all the death and destruction that he causes, is a fairly primal creature, right? Like, he's pretty basic. He's not ultra smart or anything like that. And so Superman kind of recognizes this, right? And then just like starts attacking Godzilla, right? Just starts like fighting this guy and beating the crap out of him. The funny thing about this though is Superman is doing this because, one, by removing the chains that keep Godzilla there, right? Because he was originally trapped here by like Aquaman, Batman, you know, a few of these other characters. By unlocking those chains, of course, it allows Godzilla to move. And the goal is to get Godzilla to follow him so that Superman can lead Godzilla to the larger fight. Because as you guys know, Godzilla is king of the monsters, even though King Kong is better. And that Godzilla is the one that would basically bring this entire conflict to an end, or at least that would seem to be the case. Because once Superman arrives on the scene with Godzilla in tow, Godzilla takes one look around and it's just like, son, right? Like, I am in the business of whooping ass. and business is good because Godzilla immediately gets to work. Now, here's the thing. Batman deals with Lex Luthor immediately, and it's not just Batman. It's like Batman, Supergirl, Donna Troy, Wonder Woman, and Shazam. They basically rip the arms off of MechaGodzilla, which essentially makes it useless. Batman picks it up, breaks its back in this kind of ceremonial gesture reminiscent of Nightfall when Bane broke his back. And then, like, we get into the main meat and potatoes of what's going on here. There is this really dope moment, this amazing shot when Superman's like flying towards like us as the reader and like Godzilla's in the background. I kind of want to get like this whole thing like framed if I possibly could. I don't know how in the world I get it drawn for me, but it looks amazing because Godzilla shows up here and he's like, okay, look, King Kong, it's cool. You were dealing with Jason. Don't worry, home slice, I got this. Godzilla takes this dude out in one hit. Now, technically, it's Godzilla and Superman working together using atomic breath and heat vision, which I never knew I needed to see, and I'm so glad that I did. Godzilla and Superman teaming up, like, it's amazing. Of course, Kong jumps in and deals, like, the killing blow to this guy, but, like, all of them teaming up is phenomenal, because once that's done, all the Titans effectively stand down, right? Like, the Green Lantern ring ultimately leaves King Kong, which leaves me a little sad, because honestly, I kind of want to read a solo comic book series, or even just a mini-series that follows the adventures of King Kong as a Green Lantern. Imagine King Kong out in space as like a Green Lantern. That would be amazing. But then we get this just kind of hilarious moment, right? Because the question that's asked by like Wonder Woman is, how do we solve all of this, right? Like, how do we deal with this? Because Toyman, we need to locate him and we have to find the Dreamstone and all that stuff. Superman's just like, Toyman's dead, right? He was crushed by Godzilla's foot. I overheard Cheetah and Deathstroke discussing it on my way in. And he's like, here's the Dreamstone. I'll handle getting the Titans back home. Wonder Woman's like, wow, Superman, how did you find the Dreamstone? He's like, well, as I understand it, Wonder Woman, it's called a plot device. It's a way to wrap up a story with minimal effort. No, that's actually not true. Apparently, Toyman had the Dreamstone on him the entire time. So it is a plot device, right? Like, he was crushed with the Dreamstone in hand and it was just conveniently located by Superman. So it's just a way to end the story in a really minimal, low-effort way. It's a plot device. But that's the thing, right? Like, once this is done, it wraps up fairly quickly, right? The Dreamstone is used to whisk all the Titans back to the world they came from. Lex Luthor is essentially thrown in prison. Superman takes the Dreamstone back to the Fortress of Solitude. Him and Lois Lane sit down and have a picnic. No doubt they're going to be touching naughty bits, probably in the park itself, or they're going to be like those weirdos from that TikTok where they were hiding under the tent or whatever it was. You guys know what I'm talking about? That video is strange. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. This is the end of the story. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. I loved it, and I will catch you all later. Peace.